In my experience, students are much more likely to engage in the blog space than they are in the Moodle forums, even though in a lot of ways these platforms do parallel functions. They post, they comment, they can have little widgets where they have, a star system or thumbs up, thumbs down. I can't really explain it other than to say that it's so much more user-friendly. And because it doesn't really appear to be an academic platform, students dig it. They engage with it, they write more, they write better. I find they do better critical reading, they do better critical writing, and they get better grades. Another way that I find the blog is really helpful is that I can log into the space 30, 45 minutes prior to lecture, and I can cruise through what the students have posted and prior to lecture. And I usually teach in the 8 a.m. slot, so if you teach later in the day, this would be even easier to do. But I look for students who have posted particularly insightful things, who have made really good critical thinking and critical reading connections to the actual material from the course. And I will often start the day's lecture or start the class that day by bringing up the blog, broadcasting it in front of the students and talking about how great this is and maybe use it as class discussion. Oftentimes, if there is a controversial article or there is a vehement disagreement, which again, in the blog space, the students are much more likely to engage in than if you just floated this question out, say, in class and said, what do you think? And it's controversial and it's current and nobody wants to raise their hand, but they're prolific about what they think and what they believe and what they have found when they're writing in the blog space. It gives them a level of comfort that really helps elevate the class discussion. So I'll often start with one, especially if there's been a disagreement or a sort of back and forth with comments. And we'll start that day's lecture with essentially the students' ideas rather than textual or my ideas. The blogs for the English 255 class, in fact, the blogs for all courses I teach, are an actual assessed item in the course that you can use. You can assess them any way you want, but I always tether them to class participation because I like to pluck things from the blog space and bring them into the course so that they don't feel that they are separate entities, that they have a life inside the classroom and then they have this online life. It's very important that you make sure that as much as you can, you make that a seamless transition, that it's all a part of the same discussion in the same course. But it ups the ante for students to know that they're graded on the blogs. And the rubric that you use for that can be something that you share with them. I typically don't share the rubric. I just give them a basic outline, a word count in the beginning, and then I very clearly go into the blog space and comment on the ones that are really good. And I make sure that I highlight particularly exceptional blogs inside the classroom so that I'm constantly essentially modeling what a really good blog post or what a really good blog comment looks like. And students will pick up on that very quickly. I do not make the blogs public, although you can. WordPress has a feature, has a control where you can make them open to the World Wide Web. I tend not to do this because students don't want their parents reading what they're doing in school, which is fine. But also, more importantly, it changes the tone with which they're going to communicate with one another because it shifts their audience, and so it's going to shift everything else about their writing process. There are exceptions to this. I've had a colleague, for instance, who had a blog in a literature course in which they were discussing modern short stories, modern American short stories. And they opened it up to the World Wide Web, and they got all sorts of fellow literati, just random people on the internet who had either read the short story also or really liked that author, engaging with the students in that space. And even on one occasion, the actual author herself found the blog, saw that students were reading her short story and talking about it, and actually engaged with the students in that digital space. So that's an example of how that could go very well. But in general, I keep the blogs and my wikis, in fact, closed so that it's just contained within the course. Managing the blog space is a bit time intensive the very first time you do it. Like any other tech that you integrate into your courses, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So if you're going to integrate this sort of thing into your curriculum, give yourself enough time before the course begins to really be as comfortable as you can with it before you enroll students and expect them to do things in the blog space. Also, when the students engage in the space, they tend to write more. They also tend to write better. But this, in turn, means an added workload for the professor depending on how you've set up your course. My courses tend to be writing intensive, and so I have more to read, essentially. The students are engaging in the space and they're producing better work, more work, but that means I have more to read. So managing the input and output of the blog is something you need to try as much as possible to consider before the course begins. It's very intuitive, and the more you use it, the more you can enhance the space. So TLT will set up a basic shell that allows you to post and comment, but you can add things called widgets, and widgets give you some creativity. You can have a 10-star rating system, for instance, or you can have a thumbs up, thumbs down on a comment bar, much like you would have in Facebook, for instance. And you can have music, you can have videos, and students can very easily import graphics, videos, music from their own collections, in fact, and videos that they, in fact, have made themselves on smartphones can also very readily be uploaded. And these are going to be your students that are a little more tech savvy, that have played around in the blog space before, but every time you have a student that has those skills, I like to jump on it because, number one, they teach me things that I didn't know the blog space would do, but also other students love it. They love learning from one another versus having this one direction. So if you are, like me, a great believer in social pedagogies, using digital spaces like this is an absolute game winner.